Hey everybody, welcome back to UL100ZB Information Literacy and Technology. Our next module is called Science Literacy. I'm going to play a short excerpt from a video on YouTube, and this is from John Oliver's show from HBO called Last Week Tonight. This is a segment that he did about Dr. Oz, who you may recall or maybe have seen on Oprah Winfrey's shows and also from a syndicated show that he had for some time. This is kind of an interesting thing. It talks about nutritional supplements that Dr. Oz was touting. It's going to tie into science literacy in terms of being aware of different claims that something is a miracle drug or a miracle medication for weight loss. So let's take a look at the video and then we'll come back and we'll kind of talk about some different things that we saw from the video. So here we go.
I would like to talk about doctors. They're among our most trusted professionals. Nearly 70% of us rate them highly on ethical standards. Our lives and occasionally our balls are in their hands. Which is why it was especially troubling last week to see this.
With his syndicated TV show, magazine, and website, Dr. Oz has become one of America's most trusted docs. But on Capitol Hill Tuesday, he was on the hot seat.
Excuse me, but any seat Dr. Oz is sitting on is the hot seat. So, what did the doctor do?
They criticized the talk show host for describing untested weight loss supplements as magical or miraculous.
I want you to write it down. Garcinia cambogia. Because it may be the simple solution you've been looking for to bust your body fat for good. Now I've got the #1 miracle in a bottle to burn your fat. Lightning in a bottle. It's a miracle flower to fight fat.
Miracle flowers? Are you a doctor or an Old West traveling salesman? And I got something miraculous for you, ladies and gentlemen. A monkey's paw mixed with 5 petals of a rose and a thimble full of otter semen. Guaranteed to cure your lumbago. Step right up here. The Senate hearing was about the marketing of dietary supplements, and unfortunately, no one is more effective at that than Dr. Oz.
Oz's advice is so influential that one mention of a product can cause sales to skyrocket. The phenomenon even has its own name, the Dr. Oz effect. After Dr. Oz touted a substance called green coffee bean extract, one company in Florida sold 500,000 bottles.
What's so wrong with that? Name me one case where a man named Oz claimed mystical powers and led people horribly astray. Name me one case. You can't do it. The only problem with the Dr. Oz effect is that magic pills don't technically exist, and Dr. Oz knows that.
Do you believe that there's a miracle pill out there?
There's not a pill that's going to help you long-term lose weight and live the best life without diet and exercise.
Do you believe there's a magic weight loss cure out there?
The word, if you're selling something because it's magical, no.
Right. That would be ridiculous. No one is claiming there's a magic pill out there. That would be stupid.
This little bean has scientists saying they found a magic weight loss cure for every body type.
See? He never said there was a magic pill. He said there was a magic bean. That's clearly entirely different, because magic beans are a very real thing that you trade your cow for so you can steal a golden harp from a giant. That's...
I hope you all enjoyed that. So let's come back to this. I thought that was a very interesting and a very cute satirical way of showing how important it is that science literacy is a part of our whole world of information literacy. Dr. Oz is kind of an extreme example. Unfortunately, it's not as extreme as we wish that it would be. So Chapter 9 of our textbook talks about science literacy. And this is an additional pillar of information literacy. We dealt with visual literacy during our last week's assignment. So science literacy, according to our textbook, deals with being well-versed in all matters pertaining to basic science and scientific laws, to the extent that one is able to make sound decisions concerning their well-being and the well-being of their families, communities, and society as a whole. Some of you might have heard of Neil deGrasse Tyson. He is a very well-known astrophysicist, incredibly interesting person. And I've always rather liked this quote from him. He says that science literacy is a vaccine against the charlatans of the world that would exploit your ignorance. So let's think about that for just a second. How many of you on your Facebook pages ever get little ads that run toward the right-hand side of the screen that do tout weight loss supplements or something that a celebrity has discovered that nobody else wants them to know about that's going to make them look 20 years younger? Well, that's a different part of science literacy, because we know that when we see claims like that, those are probably not too accurate. But we also want to think a little bit more about how scientific innovations actually get to a newspaper standpoint or to a news standpoint in the first place. Well, our textbook in Chapter 9 talks about several types of science literacy. There's something called civic science literacy, and that deals with knowing enough science to relate scientific laws and discoveries to matters of government and legislation. So that might deal with the environment, for example. If you know what's happening in terms of global warming, then you know about different things that can affect the environment enough that we might want to stop using them anymore, such as different antiperspirants that contain aerosols that really do wind up harming the environment and causing global warming in the first place. But part of civic science literacy is knowing how to find that information and kind of going back to what we've been talking about all along, gathering, evaluating, critically thinking about what we find in order to draw our own best judgments and our own best conclusions. Practical science literacy, making decisions about one's day-to-day life and livelihood. We might decide to live closer to a job, for example, because the commute isn't as bad, and we know that we won't have to drive our cars. Maybe we can walk, maybe we can use bicycles. That might have to deal with making decisions that would affect your livelihood. So, kind of thinking about things like that would deal with practical science literacy. Consumer science literacy. This is another type, making decisions about sound consumer choices. What kind of car are you going to buy? Are you going to buy one that maybe is considered to be a gas guzzler, but it has a lot of bells and whistles and looks really good, very impressive? Or maybe you want to buy a car that doesn't look as snazzy or impressive on the outside, but gets better gas mileage, has more healthy emissions, is better for the environment, a hybrid car, for example. So that can deal with consumer science literacy, making decisions about sound consumer choices, but knowing where to gather that information so that you're making the appropriate decisions. Well, science in reality works deliberately, cautiously, and slowly, and evidence builds over multiple studies. It's very rare for one particular study in the sciences to be the definitive study. Again, this all ties back to what we've been doing this semester with information literacy and technology. We need to gather more than one point of view. Something is not always going to be the miracle cure for a problem, for example. Something is not always going to be the one way to go about solving a particular problem. Very deliberate, very cautiously, very slowly. Sometimes what happens with science reporting, particularly when it makes it to the general news, like a news broadcast or a website or a blog, is that correlation and causation may not be the same. More often, something might be exaggerated and maybe not reporting the limitations of a particular study or treating a single study as if it contains all the answers. A good illustration of this is this link to phdcomics.com. Here we go. This talks about the science news cycle, that one might start with research that's translated to a university public relations office. This would be at a college or a university. But then it might be picked up by newswire organizations and the internets. And then I like this part here when it starts being picked up by cable news, local eyewitness news, What you don't know about A can kill you, more at 11. That's a very popular way of sensationalizing sometimes a scientific discovery so it catches attention on a popular news site like the evening news. And then finally, your grandmother. I do get a kick out of this because here's poor grandma wearing a tinfoil hat. I'm wearing this to ward off A. And this is sort of an exaggeration, but this is how sometimes, in terms of scientific information about a discovery or a medical breakthrough, how it can really get diluted through this scientific news cycle. And by the time it gets to your grandmother or it gets to somebody else that you know, it's really become very skewed and doesn't really make much sense. This, again, is all part of science literacy, knowing how to go back maybe to the original research and then figuring out what the original discovery was in terms of what was really happening, rather than it getting diluted throughout all the different filters, the different news cycles, and then finally getting to here. So I just thought that was kind of an entertaining way of looking at science reporting and what can happen. So, how do we approach science? In other words, how do you become more scientifically literate when you're dealing with a study? Think about the original study, and sometimes that can be a little bit difficult to track down because often original research in scientific phenomenon appears in scholarly journals. And we've looked at scholarly journals in terms of information literacy. We have a lot through our library. There are a lot that are available electronically, sometimes freely accessible online. It's good to be able to track down something original if you possibly can. If you can't, you can look to something called a good science-based resource as a mediator. Scientific American, for example, is a magazine that we have in our library, and it does tend to explain scientific discoveries and breakthroughs from a more of a layperson's point of view. Science 2.0 is a blog that can be very interesting, and we can take a look at this because this is another way of looking at scientific breakthroughs or scientific discoveries that again are a little bit more from a layperson's point of view. And you see that it talks about knowing science, and it's broken down into physical sciences, earth sciences, life sciences, medicine. We have a lot of interesting things. Now here's one, for example, that's called Mechanism to Delay Aging Identified. So I'm taking a look at this, and this is more written for, like a regular person who really isn't an expert in the field of science, but I could look at this and kind of get some ideas of what's going on, maybe with this breakthrough that maybe could slow down aging. But it's going to be more for a person who could understand this language. So that can be a good source of information, Science 2.0, to sort of get a little bit more into original studies and then find out the background behind those studies. Science-based medicine is another website that's going to deal a little bit more with exploring issues and controversies in science and medicine. And I like this one because I can search in the archives, as you can see, or I can start scrolling through and look at some different articles separating fact from fiction in the not-so-normal newborn nursery, chiropractic and craniosynostosis. So it looks like this is talking about the skull of the newborn, and then telling me a little bit more information about what would be going on with that. So that's science-based medicine. I do think it's a great idea to search out sites like this when you have a little bit of skepticism about something, again, in terms of the natural sciences, the physical sciences, and so forth, and maybe find out the truth behind some of the fiction. Other aspects of science literacy. You know that sometimes when we hear a story in the media that something is causing cancer, for example, it is designed to basically bring advertisers, and it really is designed to be more sensationalistic than anything else. I like this part. Do you really think you're going to learn about a major scientific discovery in an obscure corner of the web? If one study is very different from most of the others, what is the likely cause? The one that I really want to emphasize, though, was this last bullet point. I expect that many of you are either already taken or have already taken a required general education course in science, maybe biological sciences, zoology, Maybe some of you have taken a class in chemistry. Think about classes that you took in high school or in college dealing with sciences. Don't forget what you learned in that. Don't forget the scientific method of discovery, experimentation. Don't forget any of the lessons that you learned there. And like we've been doing with so many other things in information literacy and technology, be critical thinkers. Ask the questions. Don't accept something just on face value, just because it seems very sensationalistic, or again, it seems like, as Dr. Oz says, the magic pill or the magic bullet to weight loss or preventing cancer. Well, the reason I wanted to go into all of this is that we're now ready for our next assignment. So, in our Information Literacy and Technology course on Canvas, we're going to go to Modules. And I have our PowerPoint presentation on this module for Science Literacy. But now we'll go to the Science Literacy assignment. And this is going to be due next Sunday, April 5th by 11:59 p.m. What I want you to do is think again about Neil deGrasse Tyson's quote about science literacy as a vaccine against the charlatans of the world that would exploit your ignorance. I want you to keep this quote and the definition of science literacy in mind. So for this assignment, which is worth a maximum of 50 points, I want you to read 2 articles. This is an article that's called I Don't Want to Be Right, and another article that talks about vaccines and autism, a tale of shifting hypotheses. A lot of you might remember that there was a big controversy a number of years ago from a group of very worried parents who felt that their children had contracted autism from having been vaccinated against different diseases. They felt that the vaccines caused autism. That was a huge thing for a number of years. It has pretty much been discredited that there is a correlation between vaccines and autism, but it's still kind of hard to accept, especially if you're a parent who's dealing with an autistic child and you just want to know what caused that in the first place. So what I want you to do in a 3-page double-spaced minimum response, address the following questions about these 2 articles and your own opinions about vaccines and autism. I want you to quote from both articles and cite your quotations whenever you do according to MLA or APA format, no matter what you're using. So I want you to address, why are some beliefs, such as the false correlation between vaccines and autism, why are those beliefs hard to correct even with scientific evidence? Why do you think this belief about vaccines and autism became popular? Because it was very, very popular not too many years ago. And how would a knowledge of science literacy help with similar issues? Here's the rubric below that I'll be using to grade your assignment. As always, please ask me ahead of time. Contact me, email me if you have any questions about this module or the assignment, and I'm more than happy to help you. Good luck.